everybody. Welcome to the Flawed Theology Podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Susie, and we're asking the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
Another exciting episode of the Flawed Theology Podcast. Hopefully everybody is doing stellar out there today.
Ooh, stellar.
Stellar.
I like how you work. That's from our data nuggets.
Oh, yes. That'll relate to our data nuggets segment. And it also relates to what I've been reading lately. I've been having a hard time getting into various books. And so I've been jumping around because I was reading that Bill Nye book that I'd mentioned a couple episodes, Undeniable, that he didn't use the play on words for in the title. Yeah. Big miss there, Bill. But I started reading Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. Have you read that?
No, but that sounds cool.
It's by Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, okay.
I'm discovering I know absolutely nothing about astrophysics or physics in general. Yeah. I'm only at the very beginning of it, but they're talking about how things started. And I find myself wondering, how the hell did they figure this out? Because it's so interesting, but I'm realizing how little I was ever taught about this stuff in high school or college. Yeah. I never took a physics class, which is probably my own fault. I kind of regret that. Now it's I don't know anything about physics or the general concepts of things. And so it's
well, I think that most of America is with you on that one.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is I like the way he writes in general. It's very understandable for the average person. So I would definitely recommend that Neil deGrasse Tyson book. Is pretty cool, pretty engaging, and you can discover how little you know about astrophysics like I did.
We have a few corrections for the last episode.
Oh, yeah. What do we have?
Lars corrected our attribution of that quote.
Ah, yes.
Which we said it was Christopher Hitchens, and it was actually Carl Sagan, right?
I think so. Yes. The one about extraordinary claims. Now I can't remember the quote again. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence or something like that. So that was Carl Sagan that said that, not Christopher Hitchens.
And I think there was another thing we said wrong, but I can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
So we're just going to move right along.
Yeah, just apologies for misquoting things, We
are not infallible.
Yeah. If there's something that you notice that we get wrong, feel free to let us know.
And then we'll try to remember.
We'll try to remember how we fucked up and then apologize for it. It's a mark of, true growth when you can just admit you're wrong.
Humility.
So, yeah, and we're wrong all the time. So
all the time.
This is mostly an opinion show that is peppered with facts. So,
Yeah.
Data nuggets.
Speaking of facts, let's get into our data nuggets segment, which I think is pretty fun. I'm enjoying this. I'm glad you came up with it.
I love the data nuggets. I hope other people like it too.
Yeah, I'm glad you came up with this idea. Plus, the jingle is really fun. You
made a great jingle. All your jingles are great.
It's pretty fun. All right, so what do we got today?
Today, we are looking at the Pew Research article, Is There Intelligent Life on Other Planets? Opinions of the Religious and Non-Religious. So they asked a question on this survey of over 10,000 U.S. adults in 2021. And the question was something to the effect of, what is your best guess as to whether there is intelligent life on other planets? And we're not talking about microbes, right? This is intelligent life.
Right.
Yeah. 65% of all U.S. adults say that their best guess is that intelligent life does exist on other planets. Okay, first of all, does this surprise you? 65%?
I don't know. It seems a little bit high, but I would think that most people would probably admit that they probably just don't know and that it's a possibility. And I would tend to think that certain groups would lean more towards yes and other groups would be more towards no, which I'm sure the data is going to show.
And I don't think there was a I don't know answer, but there was a no answer. So some people said just did not answer.
Okay.
So then they further broke this down into categories of how important religion is to the person who responded. Among those for whom religion was very important, 49% believe life exists on other planets. But among those for whom religion is not at all important, that number goes up to 83%.
Wow. That's almost double.
Yeah, almost double. 49% to 83%.
Yeah.
I think that all these numbers are high. I would have thought all the numbers would be much lower.
Yeah.
I would have thought 30% for all U.S. adults.
Yeah. I don't know. I think people want to believe in some kind of supernatural extraterrestrial type thing because it's somewhat cultural, people find it fascinating. If you didn't like the X-Files, there's just something wrong with you.
Yeah, maybe it ties into some conspiracy theories or Roswell. A lot of people think that there were actually alien spacecraft that crashed there. So maybe that's playing into these results. There's also a breakdown by religious groups. Guess which group had the lowest percentage?
Oh, I would certainly guess it would be white evangelicals.
You're correct.
Yeah. I mean, It would have to be, because my guess, I haven't read through all your notes here, but like my guess of the reason why that would be is because humans are the most important species. And if there's people on other planets, I mean, I heard this preached in church. There's no life on other planets because if there was, then Jesus would have had to go to all those planets
You
and
heard
die
that
for them.
preached in church?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I heard that.
Wow.
Probably as a evangelical myself, I probably would have leaned towards there is no other life on other planets because then Jesus would have to go there. And of course, us being the supreme species, like how could we not know that Jesus went to other planets? Because it would have
He would have told us in the Bible, right?
Right.
What would your dad have said? Would he have said the same thing?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he would probably still say the same thing.
I wonder what my parents would say. I'm going to ask them.
Yeah.
So white evangelicals is 40%. White non-evangelicals, it goes up to 65%.
But they were still Christians.
They're still Christian.
Okay.
But they're not evangelical.
I can see that.
Catholics, 67%. So again, Catholics, they're just a little more progressive, enlightened.
Yeah, and they're like Helen was saying in the last episode, they're very much acknowledging of science.
Yeah.
So the chances of them being more educated about space and the potential of life on other planets is much higher.
Exactly. And then the highest group is atheist and agnostic. They measured them separately, but they were both 85%.
I mean, I guess that makes sense too, because like if you don't necessarily believe that humans are this like unique species, then it stands to reason. And, it kind of goes to that like feeling of I lost the word I was about to say, the like arrogance and like narcissism that you have to have to think that humans are the only intelligent life form. It seems unlikely on some level, that like there could be other intelligent forms of life, and maybe they have no interest in dealing with us because either way more intelligent than us, or they're just billions of miles away.
They're too far away. I think that's what it is. They're too far away. Yeah, and when you think about the number of stars and the number of planets that there are, it seems more than likely that there is life, at least. Maybe not intelligent, I don't know, but definitely life.
That's something I'm picking up in this book that I'm reading, is like the expanse of the universe and how big it really is. And if you see some of this imagery and stuff from the James Webb Telescope and like how that is giving us such a view into like deep space and deep time, like you really start to grasp the concept that we are very small in the grand scheme of the universe, which for some people, I guess maybe is disconcerting. But for me, it's like, I find it comforting because it's like, oh, good.
I do too.
I'm not the end all be all, and humans are not the end all be all. Like we can just, if we vaporize off this planet when we die or whatever, like who cares? Like,
well, it kind of puts things in perspective. Like if your tire goes flat on the way home from work, I don't know, when I think about our place in the universe and how much is going on that's greater than us, the tire doesn't really seem like that big of a deal anymore.
That's pretty true. But if you think everything is like a master plan and that you're this unique special creation, then you wouldn't want to admit that there's the possibility of other life.
So there were only two groups where more than 50% believe there is no other intelligent life in the entire universe. Those two groups are white evangelical and those who attend religious services weekly or more often than weekly.
So that was across all religions. If you went to church more or weekly or more than weekly, then you were in the like absolutely not category.
Right. Like you said, this is definitely because religious fundamentalists think that we're the center of the universe. And this is the same mentality that the church had hundreds of years ago when they resisted the fact that the earth revolves around the sun and that each star is a sun. In the show Cosmos, the new one with Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think it's episode 1 or 2 where he talks about, I don't know how to say his name, Giordano.
Giordano Bruno.
Say it again.
Giordano.
All right, we'll go with that.
Come on, I'm Italian.
Giordano.
To say that.
Giordano.
Come on, white lady, get it together.
No, his last name is Bruno. I'm going to just call him Bruno.
And apparently, we don't talk about Bruno. So
no, we don't.
But we're gonna.
So he was an Italian philosopher and did some other stuff too, who lived in the 1500s. This is a quote from Wikipedia. He proposed that the stars were distant suns surrounded by their own planets, and he raised the possibility that these planets might foster life of their own, a cosmological position known as cosmic pluralism. He also insisted that the universe is infinite and could have no center. So what did the church do to him? What did the Catholic Church do to him?
I remember that was the one that they had the little cartoon, right? And they had him jailed. And didn't they burn him at the stake? Like
They did.
Eventually.
They tried him and they convicted him of treason, and the Pope declared him a heretic. They burned him at the stake. They put him up naked in the square and they burned him. But now he's a symbol of free thought and speech in present day Rome, which I didn't know.
That is pretty interesting.
Cool. Yeah.
That'd be a cool tattoo that no one would get. Some kind of graphic to depict that guy. That'd be a cool conversation starter.
Yeah.
I'm always hunting for tattoo designs because one of these days I'm going to pull the trigger on a tattoo, but it has to be something like really epic. So I might add that to the list. It's got an Italian connection to it too. So, and who doesn't love a good heretic? I mean,
oh yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
So
a few years ago, I'm trying to remember how many years ago this was. Maybe like 5 years ago. This is way before we deconverted. But I asked my husband, like, if it came out that there was intelligent life on other planets, how would that impact Christianity? And I asked him this, and I really wanted him to say something like, well, I guess I'd have to reevaluate Christianity, or like, that would make me rethink things.
Right.
But what he actually said, and this is just proof of indoctrination and confirmation bias, what he actually said was, well, I guess that means that a Jesus went to that planet too.
Right.
And I was like, okay, like, I guess you're just going to like go with that and not even think about whether that makes sense. And I was really disappointed, but I couldn't say anything because I'm not supposed to question either. But I was like hoping we could just like start a conversation.
But yeah, I think that's the same thing that I would have said too. Like if it was proven, then I would say, okay, well, God's big enough to go and give salvation to other planets and stuff too. And maybe he didn't tell us about it because,
why would he?
Why would he? It doesn't matter. Like, it just goes to show that like how deeply rooted that narcissistic feeling is that like we are so important. And even if there was other life, well, Jesus would have went and did whatever he needed to do for those people too.
And that Christianity is true no matter what. And no matter what evidence we find, we have to find some way to make it fit instead of being like, does Christianity make sense?
Yeah, even though there's no mention of other life forms in the Bible or anything, there's no way you can look at the Bible and say, oh, there's life on other planets, and here's the proof that Jesus went there. Except I think they would try to misconstrue some of those times where it says that like when Jesus was dead, he went to other places to like witness to people who were dead, and so I've heard that people use that thing as like, oh, that might be where he went to. Now I'm remembering a pastor saying, oh, that could be where he went to other planets too, and if there's life there, he made sure that they knew what he did, blah blah blah, so that way even aliens are without an excuse. I like
so like he went to Tatooine or something,
right? Yeah, exactly. He went to some outer planet.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, Tatooine, or I can't even think of any other fake planet right now. So
I know. That's the only one I could think of. I don't even know how to say it.
And my nerd brain just totally crapped out. Good data nugget. I like it.
Good.
So someone suggested this in our Facebook group. Since we launched the It's Not a Bug, It's a Feature segment. So someone suggested this topic and we were going to do it in the last episode as the It's Not a Bug, It's a Feature. But we decided that we would expand on it and just turn it into the whole episode. So we're going to talk today about authoritarianism and the correlation between that and religion. And there's actually a lot of research about this, like the correlation between high control religious groups and their affinity for authoritarian power structures. And that structure seems to be favored in like every aspect of life, like government, church, the home, workplace. Like if you're into this authoritarian thing, you want it everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because like the general thing that you hear people who are like conservatives or right-wing Christian type people, they're always talking about freedom, right? They're always saying the government is taking away our freedom, this, that, and the other thing. But then in reality, what they actually want is dictatorship. And they only want the freedom to be related to their version of freedom. Yeah. Anyone else's version of freedom is not what they're interested in. So start out with a little bit of definition of what authoritarian is.
Yeah.
Authoritarianism is.
Authoritarianism, yeah.
Yeah.
In the government, so in politics, authoritarianism is a high concentration of power in the hands of one or a few without a system of checks and balances. But there's also another way that we can talk about authoritarianism. Political scientists use the word authoritarian for a worldview that values order, authority, and distrusts outsiders and social change. So this doesn't mean that this person's in charge, that these authoritarians are in charge of other people. It just means that they value these things. Mm-hmm. And when people who adopt this worldview feel threatened, they look for strong leaders. So they do want strong leaders in charge of them. Like they want
Right.
that.
Yeah, and voters used to be more evenly distributed across the parties.
Authoritarian voters.
Yeah, authoritarian voters. You don't have to go back that far to see like
pre-1960. Yeah.
Yeah, like Democrats would be like, "Oh yeah, we want a strong leader," especially with the rise of communism and like Cuban Missile Crisis and things like that. With a lot of Democrats were like, "We need a strong leader to take down, Russia and all that kind of stuff." But now you see that the Republicans started to like espouse traditional values around the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
Now the authoritarian bend is definitely more right wing.
Yeah, they're shifting
conservatives. And Trump really took advantage of this to the max. Like and he made it more almost like acceptable. Like nowadays you hear these same people that support Trump are also would support Putin, and they support the I can't think of his whole name, the Chinese president. They're actual dictators, like and which is just insane to me when you think about like what the country is built on and the idea of freedom, but they think they want somebody to rule with an iron fist.
Yeah, it's very scary that we have these authoritarians in our country who are all congregated into one political party because they're so easy to mobilize. Like they're so easy to manipulate. It's a formula. And so if you have control of that formula, you can mobilize them. And that's what Trump has been doing.
Yeah, for sure. And this authoritarian mindset is it across all high control religions, but we're going to focus mostly on fundamentalist Christianity. But you can see this philosophy across many high control religions and cults and that kind of stuff. So you'll see the common thread that believers in those philosophies are positively correlated with accepting and even supporting authoritarian ideals. You see this in Christian nationalism, which is, I think, kind of the biggest threat to our country right now, the idea of trying to turn the country into a theocracy.
Absolutely.
And like I mentioned, you see people that support Trump that also want to support Putin instead of Ukraine. In their family life, they support a more dominating parental style instead of like the gentle parenting style.
That's interesting what you said about the parenting style, because I can't remember where I read it, but there was a survey done to gauge people's level of authoritarianism. Instead of just coming right out and asking like, are you an authoritarian? Because that's kind of a sensitive question they might not answer yes to. They asked about parenting instead. So the more likely they were to have like, you must obey me kind of style of parenting, like that values following rules over curiosity and that kind of thing.
Right.
That was directly correlated to authoritarianism. And so there was like a proxy.
Yeah, it was like a little back door to figure out like they basically look for like different situations to determine, well, how would you want this situation to be handled?
Yeah, like indicators for it.
Yeah, basically indicates that you have this bend towards authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Which I will be the first person to say I had that bend, and every once in a while I battle with that with parenting.
Yeah.
You have this feeling of like you just have to like take control of the situation.
Yeah.
And maybe there are times that you have to do that for safety or for something like that. But by and large, parenting has to be about teaching. And I'm learning this a little bit coaching soccer because I'm coaching travel soccer. I took a course through US Soccer coaching certification, and their whole thing was like, hey, you can't just tell the kids what to do. You have to like ask the questions so they come up with what to do on their own, and it's like very similar to parenting. And you still see people buck up against that because they're like, no, with that gentle parenting or gentle coaching or whatever, that doesn't work. These kids need to be beaten to submission, and every once in a while, I sometimes agree because my kids act like assholes. And I'm like, man, I would have never acted like this, but I was also deathly afraid of my parents.
Right. And we don't want our kids to be afraid of us. Well, we both have kids who have behavioral challenges.
Yeah.
And it's really hard sometimes to just be like, just do this.
Just do.
Like they don't respond to that.
Yeah.
And like I know my daughter will just melt down and she has rejection sensitivity and all this stuff. My parents would have handled it so much differently. Like my dad would have come out with a ping pong paddle and threatened me with it.
Yeah.
He normally didn't use it. I just have to disclaimer.
Oh, my parents did. My parents used a spoon, hangers, whatever they could find, paddles. Yeah.
But he wanted me to be scared and it worked.
Right. So why do you think this is? Like, why is there such a high correlation between fundamentalist Christianity and this bend towards authoritarianism? For me, I feel like the whole basis of belief is kind of rooted in authoritarianism, with God being the ultimate authority. And the phrase that I always heard growing up, it was, God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. And then I distinctly remember pastors, and my own dad, who was a pastor, he would say things like, it doesn't matter if you believe it. So you can change the phrase to, God said it, and that settles it. So that's like the ultimate, authoritarianism. It's like, there's only black and white. There's no gray. There's no middle ground. Everything is clear cut. And you see this being displayed today in how people view all these gray issues like human sexuality.
Yeah. And I used to be like this. I was always very black and white with everything, like especially with homosexuality. I was like, either you are or you aren't. There is this like, there's this 1% of me that's like bi-curious or whatever. I was like, you kissed a girl, you're gay. Like,
right. Damn it, Katy Perry, you're screwed.
Yeah, right. I don't think that anymore. And I think that's very telling that once you let go of that fundamentalism, all that black and white thinking goes away.
Yeah, and it's like disconcerting too at some point, because like I can remember, not really, it doesn't seem like that long ago, like if I saw something, homosexual in a TV show or a movie or whatever, I'd be like, just have this like little inner cringe, and like now I couldn't care less. Like it doesn't faze me at all. If I see two dudes holding hands or whatever, I'm like, oh, good for them. Like, so that's interesting how that happens.
So there are a lot of common values between fundamentalism and authoritarianism, which probably is why there's such a strong correlation. They both are characterized by low openness to experience, high rigidity, and low cognitive complexity.
Oh, that's interesting. It's kind of like a really nice way of saying you're not good at thinking. Like,
you're not supposed to think.
Yeah, you can't think. And then the other values that are in there are like submission to authority. That's a given. Conventionality, which is, the very basis of a lot of this stuff, like traditional values.
Oh, like social conventions. Is that what that means? Conventionality?
Yeah, social conventions. And then obviously intolerance of out groups. Like, if you're not in, well, then you're out no matter what way you're out, and then it's our job as the people being in the right to control those people that are in the out groups,
So you put all that together and you get something that's unquestioned.
Right.
No matter if it's an authoritarian leader or you're a religious leader, don't question them. Don't think. You accept what they say.
Right.
You submit, and that's it.
But at the same time, authoritarian leaders would pretend like they would be okay with questions. You would hear pastors say, hey, don't take my word for it. Go do your own research. But then if you actually did your own research and it didn't line up with what they said, then you would be like branded as like rebellious or, you're stirring the pot or whatever. So they don't actually want you to question. Wrong. Yeah.
Well, like what my mom said to me when she first learned that I was questioning. She said I was asking dangerous questions to the wrong people.
Right.
Now, if that is not exemplary of everything that we're just saying.
Right.
I guess I grew up in a authoritarian religion.
Yeah. You probably don't even really realize it because
I didn't.
That's just what you knew.
Yeah.
Like you didn't know any better. And when you're a kid, there's some measure of safety that it feels safe to be in that controlled environment.
Yeah, I guess so.
So what's some other factors in why this is?
Psychology and sociology, they're both different schools of thought, and they both have theories about why people are, that they're willing subjects of authoritarianism or are authoritarian leaders.
Yeah.
So psychology says it's innate to the personality. So you're born like that.
Right.
People's brains are just wired to thrive in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
And sociology considers authoritarianism a result of one's environment and posits that it may be influenced by factors such as religion. So this is really like a nature versus nurture argument.
Right. Yeah. And there's a kind of a scholarly article about this that, of course, I don't have the whole article, but it kind of delves into, and they had some kind of testing that they did to kind of try to tease out if it was something that was innate to your personality that made you tend towards liking that environment or thriving in it, or if it was something related to your social construct and how you were brought up. What's your thought about it?
I think it's a mix, honestly. I think that some people are predisposed to be authoritarian leaders or to be led like that. And I think people are highly suggestible.
Yeah.
If you are raised in that environment, then you're more than likely just going to go along with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would tend to think it's a mix of the stuff too. I would probably lean more towards it being a result of your environment because
yeah, me too.
I think by general human nature, we're explorers. We want to experience things. We don't necessarily want to be told what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some people that were brought up in an environment where being told what to do made them feel safe. But then some people that were in that environment, it did not make them feel safe. And so then they
Like
rebelled
Bruno.
against it.
Like
Yeah.
Bruno was brought up in that environment, but he rebelled against it. He must not have had that innate
Yeah.
trait.
There's probably some kind of piece in there genetically that was like, nope, I don't like
Yeah,
this. Well, I mean, it's
exactly.
kind of similar, like the difference between you and me, like with our childhoods. Like you were perpetually questioning, even though we were
Yeah.
maybe not the same style of authoritarian environment, but like still top down, style. And yours
Yeah.
was more like questioning and like skeptical. And mine was like, okay, that's just how it is.
Mine was definitely a lighter authoritarianism.
Yeah.
I mean, I was no Bruno for sure.
Yeah, I certainly wasn't either. And another factor in this of why this is like the idea of if you consider yourself religious or if you consider yourself spiritual. And so they did a study of Americans born in the 1920s that found that the effect held for traditional church-centered religion, they tended towards authoritarianism, but those that were seeking like a non-institutional spirituality, they tended to not be into authoritarian ideology.
Yeah, that goes back to the values that we were talking about earlier. Low openness to experience, high rigidity, low cognitive complexity. Those are not things that lead to spirituality. So if you're somebody who considers themselves spiritual, you're not in that frame of mind where you're going to be subject to authoritarianisms.
Well, yeah, and if you think about the difference between even styles of churches, like my church, especially as a child, was very rigid. As an independent fundamentalist Baptist church, the pastor was the end all be all, and they looked down on other sects of Christianity that had like a hierarchy and even though they had a board of elders or a board of deacons or whatever, in the end, the pastor was the final authority. So,
do you mean the hierarchy like the Catholic Church with like bishops and archbishops and the Pope and stuff? Okay.
Yes, they would have been like, oh well, they have to go through a whole process, and we can just go right to the top.
Okay.
Which I guess Catholics still have some kind of authoritarian structure because you still have the Pope at the very top.
Yeah.
But like you basically could never bypass the hierarchy to go straight to the Pope with your thing. Whereas in a church, you might be able to go straight to the pastor and be like, this deacon's doing this and blah, blah. I think it just made those churches like really prone to discord because the deacons didn't always agree with the pastor, but they had to, if they wanted to maintain their power, they had to kind of toe the line. So.
So you have a lot of cool things about the brain.
Yeah, so I came across this article that talks about linking the brain to authoritarianism. They did a study of people that had brain damage. Prefrontal cortex damage was correlated with higher instances of authoritarian and fundamentalism versus healthy brains or other brain damaged patients.
Okay. So this is specifically prefrontal cortex damage.
Yeah. So if you had a traumatic brain injury and it damaged your prefrontal cortex, in this study, those people tended to be more geared towards accepting authoritarian ideology versus a healthy brain, or if you had some other different kind of brain damage that wasn't to the prefrontal cortex. At first, when I started reading this article, I thought they were going to say that authoritarianism actually caused brain damage, which is kind of what I was hoping it was going to say, but it didn't.
Well, that's kind of what I'm drawing from this. I mean, obviously we can't draw that conclusion, but
not from this study anyway.
It makes me wonder, is there something going on with people who are predisposed to authoritarianism? Is there something going on in their brains structurally or chemically in their prefrontal cortexes?
Yeah.
That make them more susceptible to it? And are these the people who are considered themselves authoritarians who then all migrated over to the Republican Party and are now MAGA Trumpers?
Right. And I thought it was also interesting is that the patients with the prefrontal cortex damage, they had like what they called a doubt deficit. So they were less likely to doubt anything, you know, just because of their damage. They would accept basically what was told to them without questioning it, which is, I mean, that's a perfect recipe for someone who is going to fall into an authoritarian fundamentalist religion, you know, because
that's crazy. All I ever do is doubt myself, doubt everything, doubt everyone.
We'll post the link to this article. It's hard to read a little bit, but they used a lot of different psychometric testing.
When was this study done?
This was done, it looks like the article was published in 2012.
Okay.
It looks like they studied 20 people, 20 individuals with adult onset brain lesions, 10 patients with bilateral damage to the prefrontal cortex, and then 10 patients with damage to regions outside the prefrontal cortex. But it's pretty interesting read showing that there's actually a connection between the prefrontal cortex and the tendency towards authoritarianism.
But now somebody should do a study to see if there's differences in the prefrontal cortex between MAGA Trumpers and normal people.
Well, yeah, and that's actually like the last thing in my notes is like, I would really love to know if there is actual prefrontal cortex differences in a person who is authoritarian versus someone who isn't. Like, is there a way to test that? Is there a way to look at the imagery and see and
characterize the difference?
Yeah, is there neurotransmitter differences? There all kind of
If there is, we could just give people medication and they'd be cured.
I know, that would be crazy.
That would be nice.
If it's a neurotransmitter thing, that would be wild.
How would you disseminate it against their will?
You have to sneak it into their chicken, into their cornflakes.
They'll never fall for it because they're all conspiracy theorists.
Right. So let's talk about kind of how this presents itself. I mean, obviously the thing that jumps right out is like in the political arena, obviously for most of us Americans, the Trump phenomenon and the religious right is the quintessential explanation of how this was exploited to perfection on some level. I would, first of all, I'm going to recommend two things if you want to really dig into this is the book Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Dumez. That is an incredible book because for most of us, we probably wonder like how on earth did we get here with the religious right being aligned with Christianity and all that kind of stuff. She goes into this and explains it so well that it's really good. And she goes into the whole authoritarian thing with Trump, like, and that's why he was like the perfect thing for right-wing Christians, even though every other Christian was like, this guy's the furthest thing from Christian. Why would we follow him? And then there's a podcast called Straight White American Jesus with Bradley Onishi, and he is a religion professor at a school, I believe, in upstate New York. And I can't remember his co-host name now. It's slipped my mind. But their podcast is really good, and they have topics that are, they're kind of more scholarly, but they're very down to earth, and they kind of tie in Christian nationalism and really explain kind of how it's come to be in such kind of, I mean, it's really the driving thing, it seems like, that's making the country dangerous.
Yeah. And I think it's a lot of like opportunism. Trump has been opportunistic for sure.
Yes.
He's not even religious.
No.
I mean, he doesn't know anything about the Bible. And what did he call it? He called 2 Corinthians
he called it 2 Corinthians. Yeah.
Somehow he has fooled all these people into thinking that he's the savior of Christianity.
Right. Mostly because he pretends to be pro-life. That's like the one thing.
Yeah, because he never was before.
Which he never was before. But then also it's because he knows that right-wing voting base is a huge power base.
It was right there waiting for him, and he knew exactly what to do and exactly what to say. Before, we were saying that authoritarians, they like these strong leaders because they want to bring back those values from a long time ago, those conservative values. They want to get back to that place where white evangelicals were in charge. And he promised them that. He's like, he comes out and he's bold. He makes bold statements, and he's not scared of anyone, and he doesn't mince his words. They saw that as like, wow, he's like a breath of fresh air. He's going to change everything for us. And he's the one. He capitalized on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's an article that's called Trump's Use of Religion Follows the Playbook of Authoritarian Leaning Leaders the World Over. So this isn't new. Trump just used a tried and true tactic. This is quote from this article. In their new book, Taking America Back for God, sociologists Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry contend that many of Trump's white Christian supporters see him as their long-awaited savior, not just the protector of traditional religion, but also the defender of a bygone way of life. In that imagined past, white men ruled the roost, families went to church every Sunday, and outsiders knew their place. A deep-rooted desire for return to that past may have been why Trump's Make America Great Again slogan proved to be so potent. As Yale scholar Philip Gorski has argued, that phrase can be interpreted to mean making white Christianity culturally dominant again.
Yeah.
That pretty much says the whole thing. And the only thing I probably would contend with in that quote is, it says imagined past, but that is how the past was. White people ruled the roost and cultural Christianity was dominant.
Yeah, you're right.
If you weren't in that group, you were a second-class citizen. You saw this with slavery. You saw it like after World War II with Japanese internment camps. They othered people, and it was all under the guise of, well, we have to protect the country.
Yeah, and this leads right into an NPR story that my husband sent me, and he didn't even know we were doing this topic, and he sent it to me. It was kind of like a God thing,
Oh, yeah, totally. Totally a God thing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Stephen Levitsky, who is a government professor at Harvard, he wrote the book Tyranny of the Minority. And he says that democracy in America is backsliding before our very eyes, which is a really scary thought.
Yeah.
He goes on to explain that on January 5th, Georgia elected an African American and a Jewish American to the Senate for the first time. And so that shows just how much the U.S. has come in making a multiracial democracy. But then the very next day, January 6th,
right,
we had an insurrection, which was perhaps a reaction against that multiracial democracy. Because today, for the first time ever, the percent of African Americans in Congress is equal to the percent of African Americans in the population.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is a great thing. Like that is the goal.
Right.
But this is probably what's been radicalizing the Republican Party and the authoritarians.
Right.
So Freedom House has an annual global freedom index from a 0 to 100 score. It scores how democratic a country is.
Okay.
10 years ago, the U.S. was scored a 92. For reference, 0 is North Korea. North Korea is 0.
Yowzers.
Yeah, we were 92. Now, 10 years later, we're down at 83. So we went from 92 to 83. So democracy in America is backsliding. We're below Argentina. And the reason the score decreased is because of widespread efforts to restrict access to ballots, the violent threats against election workers and prosecutors, and the sitting president tried to literally overturn an election.
Right.
And the principal reason that Stephen Levitsky is saying is that a long dominant ethnic group has lost its majority status and its status on the social hierarchy. No other democratic society has ever undergone this kind of thing. This shift from a predominantly whites being the dominant group,
right,
to being way more of a mix.
Yeah.
And he specifically said white Christians. He didn't just say whites. The woman who was interviewing him said, "You're talking about white men, right?" And he said white evangelical Christians.
Yeah. It's scary to think about because if you get kind of into looking at this Christian nationalism thing, it is scary stuff. But then it's also comforting on some level to remember that they may be vocal, but they're still a dwindling minority.
Yeah.
We need to take some kind of comfort in that, but then also we need to make sure that we are taking action against that stuff. So that's why your vote is important. Because if you don't want the country to actually become a theocracy and our democracy score to keep plummeting, then you actually have to do something about it. You can't just sit in your house and complain about it.
It's also interesting because he said that there are a few things that we should change, that Supreme Court justices should have a term limit.
Absolutely.
It should not be a lifetime. He's like, no other country does this, or maybe one other.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was the Electoral College. Just do it by popular vote.
Right.
Why are we giving these rural places so much power when we should just do it by popular vote?
Well, and the concept behind the Electoral College, it at one point made logical sense because you were trying to give fair representation based on population, but now it doesn't make sense because of that very reason. The rural population somehow, they outweigh they can swing a whole state the way of Christian nationalism, which is ultimate goal is the theocracy, and that's not really representative of what the whole state actually believes, so
right.
So you see this also coming out in not only Christian nationalism but in actual state religions. Like in Russia, the state religion is Russian Orthodox. Even the beginning of our own country, the Church of England, the reason we started this country was it was sold to us as religious freedom. If you do some research, you realize it's not really religious freedom. It's just that they wanted a more authoritarian version of their own version of Christianity. But that's a separate story. You can read Andrew Seidel's book about that. But the Church of England, if you spoke out against the church in England back in the, colonial times, you would get killed or you would be put in prison. Russian Orthodox, the state religion holds a sway over the whole country. You're just born into that. You don't really have a choice to be Russian Orthodox. It's part of how that country runs.
There's also 4 countries that practice state atheism currently. There's a whole bunch that were formerly state atheist, but now, of course, China, we have the Lao People's Democratic Republic, North Korea, and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam.
Yeah, which is like
forced secularism, which to me isn't good either.
Right. Like where you're forcing people like to not believe anything is
that's just as bad.
That's not okay either. Because the whole kind of drive of atheism in general, and I guess in a free society, is that you just don't see the evidence to believe in gods. So the idea of forcing that on someone in an authoritarian way is just as damaging as forcing someone to believe in a god.
And I think we see that in our families, right? We grew up in families where the family religion was forced on you.
Right.
Our kids are growing up in families where religion or atheism is not being forced. Right. I'm for sure telling my kids, I don't believe in God and here's why. But I'm not going to tell them they can't go be religious someday.
Right.
They have the freedom to do that.
Right. I've had a few conversations with my older kids, and they come up and say, well, what do you think? What about this? It'll be something about religion. I'll say, well, some people believe that. I'll just come back to them. I was like, well, what do you think about it? And they'll be like, well, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And I'll be like, okay. And I pretty much always say is well, you don't have to make that decision now.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It's not really on your radar. It shouldn't affect your life. It doesn't have to control your life. When I was 11 and 13 years old, Christianity dominated my life. My kids are doing all kinds of other stuff, what kids should be doing. They're not worried about sin and going to hell. And kids shouldn't have to worry about that stuff. It just shows the difference between an authoritarian structure where you encourage your kids to question and let them come to their own conclusions, instead of trying to steer them down the path of atheism or down the path of religion. Forced belief systems of any kind are damaging. So
exactly.
And then I think lastly, the ultimate extension of state religions is the idea of theocracies. Currently in the world, most of the theocracies are Muslim countries like Iran and Iraq. And you see the impacts of forced religion on those societies. And you see the rebellions and things that are happening in those societies as women start to stand up for themselves as people.
Definitely. And the one that comes to mind for me is I was following pretty closely in Saudi Arabia when women were fighting for the right to have driver's licenses. They've been fighting for that since 1990, and they finally got it, I think in 2017 or 2018. They were arrested, tortured, and even after the women finally got the right to drive, they still had all these women that were detained. They tortured them as part of a crackdown on feminism.
Yeah, and the quality of life that they've had just living under a theocracy. It's interesting, there's been all these things in history where authoritarian religion has been extremely destructive, and killing. The Crusades, you mentioned that in the previous episode we were talking about it. There's a long history of authoritarian Christianity just killing people to try to bring Christianity into the mainstream and make it the forced religion. Constantine was the starter of this, when he made it the state religion of Rome and tried to turn the Roman Empire into a theocracy, so it's interesting how all these things play out in the political arena. So moving on to a little bit how do we see authoritarianism presented in Christianity, or how do you see it expressed? And there's a couple of areas of life that we'll talk about. And the first one we've kind of already touched on a little bit is just the concept of marriage and parenting and family.
Yeah. So we're thinking about the stupid umbrellas.
Yeah.
So Christ is at the top.
Right.
And then the husband umbrella is underneath, but somehow still has rain coming off the side.
Right.
Even though it's smaller than the Christ umbrella. So the Christ umbrella must have holes in it.
Yes, clearly.
And then the husband umbrella is above the wife umbrella, which is then smaller, of course.
Right. Smaller, yeah, yes.
Then that one's above the children.
Then this comes from Bill Gothard and his, for most people know, that was the person that the Duggars were involved in, and the family institute and basic life principles. This is the whole IFB religion, which is kind of what I grew up in, this structure.
Yeah.
Like I saw this stupid umbrella thing like my whole childhood, and never, ever, 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 ever did I ever look at that picture and say, wait, that's not how umbrellas work, which is what I say now. Every time someone posts this thing, I just say, man, it'd be great if these people knew how umbrellas worked. If you have an umbrella on the top, it protects everybody.
Yeah, you don't need any more umbrellas.
Yeah, you could have just stopped your diagram there. The goal of this diagram was to reinforce one of the 7 principles of IBLP, which is authority. These are direct quotes from the handbook, IBLP handbook. God-given authorities can be considered umbrellas of protection. By honoring and submitting to authorities, you will receive the privileges of their protection, direction, and accountability. If you resist their instructions or move out from their jurisdictional care, you forfeit your place under their protection and face life's challenges and temptations on your own.
So horrible.
So gross. So Gothard's umbrella, this is also direct from the thing. Gothard's umbrella of protection in family relationships puts the husband in charge under Christ and the wife totally subservient to the husband, and her access to God is through the husband.
So she can't even talk to God?
Right. No, she has to go through the husband.
Are you kidding?
She could pray, but in the end, like if she prayed for something that the husband wasn't in agreement with, well, then her prayer doesn't really matter because the husband is the head. Yeah. And the husband is responsible for making all the decisions of the family. And then it's her job to properly instruct and manage the children. The children's spirituality and access to God is through the mother as she submits to her husband. And then the children must be totally responsive to their mother's authority. There's so much wrong with this. It's like hard to even know where to begin.
What if the husband who is responsible for making decisions makes a wrong decision?
Tough shit.
What if he gambles all the money away?
Right.
Did God tell him to do that? Or is he infallible?
Yeah. And if you talk to anyone who's grown up in a marriage or that had a marriage like this or had a parental structure like this, there's so little room for what you would call today like teamwork.
Yeah.
Amongst the husband and wife. You're not working together. It's like, okay, your input has been noted and I'm going to do what I want. And that trickles down to the kids as well. Like, so whatever the parents said, whatever mom says goes. And it doesn't matter if you have a logically well thought out reason why you don't want to do it or why it shouldn't. It doesn't really matter, Even
my parents were not like this. They were sort of like this, but not as bad as this.
Yeah.
Were your parents like this?
Oh, my parents were like this. Yes.
And still are?
Well, they don't have any kids in the house
Well, I know,
anymore.
but the first 2 umbrellas are...
Oh, yeah.
First 3 umbrellas.
My mom is still... She would never, ever admit this, but my mom probably hates this umbrella thing because she's a rebellious cuss like me. But she never would step out from under this umbrella because she believes in it too much. And there were times where I thought, she's bucking the system, and she's going to either leave or something is going to go wrong and she's just going to fall back in line, which usually she just fell back in line or whatever. But she was clinically depressed for a lot of my childhood. I think because of this, I think there's some measure of she struggles and struggled with the cognitive dissonance that was required to be in that kind of structure. And my dad was soft spoken. I could count on one hand the times that I ever heard my dad yell, but he kind of ruled the household with the iron fist.
That makes me sad for her.
Yeah, me too. She didn't know what she didn't know.
Yeah.
And I see my sisters that are still in this are in the same structure in their marriages. But setting up a family like this, it's got a ton of detrimental effects on the kid. I jotted a couple of them down. And for me, the first one is it creates an environment that's ripe for abuse to be tolerated, permitted, and honestly, even accepted. You see this in the family, you see it in the church, you see it everywhere where there's a leader at the top doing something he shouldn't do. They're very rarely held accountable for it. Very damaging, obviously.
Yeah, it is, for sure.
Another thing that I think this does is it really removes the concept of individual autonomy from everybody, except for the head of the family,
Yeah.
So the man can do whatever he wants, because he's the head, but nobody else has any kind of autonomy, no ability to think for themselves.
It's almost like putting the man in God's position.
Oh, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Because, the wife would view as, well, just as Jesus is the head of the church, my husband is the head of the household and I defer to him for everything.
Yeah. But if you think that your husband has a direct connection to God that you don't have, there's no difference effectively between God and your husband. Your husband is your God. I found some Bible verses regarding kind of this whole topic. This verse I find very scary. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you
Right.
have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. That's from Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. So this means, A, everybody who's in power is sanctioned by God and is morally right, doing the right thing.
Right.
If they're being bad to you, it's because you are bad.
Right.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
That leaves no room for people being corrupt. They're in there because God wants them to be there.
Right. Exactly. Interestingly, it only translates to when it's a Republican Christian president,
Right.
allegedly. Then it's God's man in there. But if it's a Democrat guy, he's not God's man. And you don't have to submit to his authority.
It's funny how they rationalize that because,
Yeah.
Biden is in power right now. Isn't he appointed
Yeah.
by God?
Right. And honestly, the Democratic presidents that we've had are actually Christian people.
Mm-hmm. Every single one of them.
Most of them are actually practicing Christians that live the Christian life that a Christian would support. But because they're not giving the power to the right wing fundamentalists, they're like, well, no, they're the Antichrist, you know?
Yeah. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. And then there's another one from 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 18. And I made sure to get a translation that used the word slave instead of servant, because
Right.
we're not mincing words here. These are slaves.
No, the word is slaves. It's
Yeah.
servants was a adaptation to try to soften it.
Right. Slaves, accept the authority of your masters. Do this with all respect. You should obey masters who are good and kind, and you should obey masters who are bad. Ah!
So it's okay if the master beats the slaves or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even other Bible verses that say it's okay if you beat your slaves as long as you don't kill them.
Yeah.
That's in the Bible.
Yeah, and that one doesn't have to do with government, but it's that same structure that is enacted everywhere. Like you said, it's in every aspect of these people's lives. They
Right.
just love it so much. It's in their households, it's in their government, it's in their churches,
Yeah.
it's everywhere.
Well, and the quintessential verse, obviously, about the family and wives is, Ephesians 5:22 and 23. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the savior of the body. So, I mean, talk about inflating a dude's ego. You
Yeah.
tell the husband, oh, yeah, you're the head of the home, just like Jesus is the head of the church, and I'm the savior of the body. In
Yeah.
Gothard's thing, he specifically said, the wife owes the husband sex whenever he wants it,
Ugh.
because that's her duty.
Yeah, it's basically his body.
Right. It's his. She's property, essentially. Another area you see this, like you see it in the family and parenting, but you also see it in how LGBTQ people are treated in our society. And there's an article called How Targeting LGBTQ plus Rights Are Part of the Authoritarian Playbook. And this is from Human Rights Watch. And it goes into a lot of the talk about, in the US, lawmakers have increasingly proposed legislation where they're targeting trans, non-binary, gay people. They're trying to remove, gay marriage. They're trying to make it to even say that you can't even talk about these topics. So I think in their study, they analyzed 217 bills and laws that restrict comprehensive sexuality education, including information on sexual orientation and gender identity. And they banned this alleged quote unquote indoctrination because they view that as indoctrination, not
Wow.
the actual indoctrination that they're doing. And
Yeah.
these laws are on the books in a lot of states like Texas,
Yeah.
Oklahoma, South Dakota, Florida.
Terrible now.
They passed that don't say gay law. Like you could be prosecuted for saying the word gay in a school and talking about it, or saying I have two dads or two moms. Like, they're trying to create a society of control by even banning the discussion. But these people want freedom.
They want freedom of speech. Yeah.
Right. Freedom of speech, but not that speech.
Protect your amendments, not that one.
Right. Yeah.
One reason that the authoritarians do not like these LGBTQ plus relationships is because when you have a same-sex relationship, you don't have those divided gender roles.
Right.
You can't do the umbrella. I forget
Right.
which guest it was who was telling us about this, and it's really the first time I thought of it. She was saying that in like same-sex marriages, there's way more equality than there is in a heterosexual.
Yeah, I can't remember who was it that said that. Was it
I
April
don't
and
remember.
Beecher when they were on, or
no? I'm thinking it was the one who was on Naked and Afraid.
Oh, Janice.
It could have been her.
Yeah, I think it was her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's also, interestingly enough, has come out as her partner is non-binary that she's with now, and so that's really cool for her considering the background. She came from this exact umbrella structure marriage, and guess what happened in that marriage? Abuse. That husband was abusing children, and he was a pedophile. Like, this isn't stuff that we're making up. Like, this is real life stuff. And you also see this kind of come out in the concept of purity culture too. Women are held responsible for all the actions of men. You can't dress a certain way that's provocatively because men are going to stumble. And purity culture, I feel like, is another just gross expression of authoritarianism. Your sexuality is governed by religion. You can't have normal sexual feelings. You can't have lust. You can't have premarital sex because you're going to be viewed as chewed up gum and a rose with no petals. This is all domination of females. And the way it translated to men was totally different. It was just like your sexuality was ick, but it wasn't like you were less of a person. It was like, hey, just don't watch porn and don't jerk off. That's all you got to worry about.
Yeah. We see that this is really, really harmful and dangerous. And we see this in real life. We have seen abuse that has come out. We see how this presents in the family, and we've heard about a lot of people who were abused by their parents. Obviously, it's not just religious families who experience abuse, but...
Well, and it's baked right in, and that's kind of the whole point of this whole thing is like, that idea is baked right in to evangelical fundamentalist Christianity. It's not an outlier. It's not a bug. It's a feature, there's no accountability. There's hundreds and thousands of these stories that are coming out like every day. There was a big investigation in 2019 that the Houston Chronicle did, and we'll post the link to it, although I think it's behind a paywall to read the whole story. But there's so many parts to their investigation, but they found 263 offenders in 20 years across 30 states in DC of like clergy and deacons and stuff that were...
Is this just the Southern Baptists?
I think this study is what led to the 2022 study that the Southern Baptist Convention did, which will also post the report. The Southern Baptist one in 2022 is a 288-page report about decades of systemic abuse that was happening in Southern Baptist churches that they knew about. They actually had a list of these pastors, and they did nothing about it.
And they just shuffled them around, right?
Just shuffled them around like they do with Catholic priests when they get busted.
Going back to the 2019 investigation, where the Houston Chronicle found 263 such offenders. I don't understand. 263 offenders in what? Like,
this was just in their own investigation into the Southern Baptist Church.
Okay, into the Southern Baptist Church. So it is limited to Southern Baptist.
It looks like this.
That's not a lot for like all of Christianity, like the whole country.
Yeah, no,
that's not a lot.
This is just the people that they personally like discovered. There was like 700 victims. I can't click on a lot of this stuff, but like, there's article after article in this investigation.
There's no shortage.
Like this is not an outlier, and I forget the number that's in the Southern Baptist dossier that came out. But to me, like, if you have a 288-page report about abuse in your denomination,
that's too many pages.
That's too many pages. That's a huge, huge problem. There's documentaries coming out, like about the Hillsong documentaries that are coming out. So like, this is one of the only things that in my personal Facebook I will post about, like, in relation to my deconversion and religion, because I feel like we have to like point out this kind of stuff, because the agenda that people are trying to have, that it's trans people reading to kids, that's going to bring down the country. No, it's not. It's shit like this. It's your pastor systemically abusing people in the church, and getting away with it because of the structure that allows them to do it. That has to be called out. And so I feel like I could post an article of this kind of stuff happening every day if I really wanted to.
It's funny because you don't have to be deconverted to call this out.
No.
Yet I don't see very many Christians railing against abuse in the church.
No.
I really don't see that.
Yeah, of any people that you would think you would get a click on, But then
Yeah.
at the same time, they would just explain it away and say, "Oh, he made a mistake. Like this
He's
guy made a
human.
mistake. He's human, you know." And they do the same thing with Trump too. Like, oh, all his stuff. Well, he's human. We didn't call him to be pastor. We called him to be president. You know. So you see all this like explaining away and saying that it doesn't matter. Were you subject to authoritarian leadership in your time as a Christian? Like, is there anything you can remember?
Not so much. No, my church, I mean, it had undertones of authority structures, but it wasn't overt like this. And they never like ordered us around. We didn't have like purity culture drilled down our throats or anything.
Right.
I got that mostly from my parents.
Yeah.
But I don't know if this was my own perception. If it is, that's my fault. But I think it's a mix. I really viewed the pastor as almost like God. And I was terrified, especially as I got older and I realized that I was like mostly full of doubts and zero faith. I was afraid to like shake his hand as we walked out of church. I thought he could like see into my soul.
Right.
I really thought they would be able to tell. Like they could separate the
out.
wheat from the chaff or whatever that saying is. And they would know that I was chaff.
Yeah.
And my uncle is a pastor and I tried so hard not to think of him as a pastor because I knew if I did, like I'd get so freaked out I wouldn't be able to talk to him.
Like he has X-ray Jesus vision.
Yeah.
He can see into your heart and see if Jesus was in there, like just hanging out in your left ventricle. Like
he was not there. I think that I probably perceived them that way because of this authority structure where like they had a direct line to God. And it almost gave them like supernatural powers in my mind.
Yeah.
A lot of that is just probably how I perceived it. So I can't like blame my church for that, but it was there. It was there.
Yeah, you probably can because the structure is the structure. The perception is reality on some level. And you were like somewhat intuitive enough to know that there's something not right here because that's not a normal, like you shouldn't view someone that's supposed to be an authority figure that's presents themselves as a positive authority in your life. You shouldn't have to be afraid of them.
Right.
So it's like going to the principal's office in school. Like that's not how you should have to view someone like that.
That's exactly how I felt about it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's supposed to be like the shepherd of the flock, but you were more worried about them breaking your legs with the cane as opposed to gently shepherding you back into the fold, you know? So
yeah. So were you subject? You were probably subject to way more authoritarian.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I definitely like my family structure was certainly authoritarian on multiple levels. My church things, I'm not sure if I ever really noticed it per se. Certainly not as a kid, I wouldn't have noticed it. I probably had a little bit of that same type of fear of the pastor.
The pastor was your dad.
Yeah, my dad was the pastor like later in my childhood, but as a young child, we went to other churches. And then he started a church later in my childhood. And then that was different because I don't know. I didn't view that church authority as anything bigger than the parental authority. The parental authority was probably more of a thing for me, you know, and in churches, I think later as an adult and stuff, there were certain churches where I felt that the pastor kind of had a heavy hand. Like when I was in Calvary chapels, those pastors, because of their like wide breadth of Bible knowledge, I viewed them as like super authoritative about everything. And they were all genuinely nice people, you know, but at the same time, like if I did something in the church that was going to get me a talking to, it was not like a pleasant experience, you know?
Right. Just remember that every Christmas, my parents would play Bible trivia with my aunt and uncle, my aunt and my pastor uncle. And sometimes like us kids would play.
Yeah.
I somehow managed to escape playing every single year. I got out of it because I was terrified to play Bible trivia in front of my uncle.
That's funny.
He would find out I didn't know very much.
I'm the opposite because we had Bible trivia junior like when I was a kid and I used to just dominate. But yeah, it's interesting looking back on it now. Like some of it just seems like so fuzzy. There's probably things if I thought about, I'd be like, oh yeah, that was definitely an authoritarian structure, but it just felt so normal. And when you believe in it so wholeheartedly, you don't really even notice like that what's happening to you and around you is not normal or healthy.
Yeah. I have to say that I did notice a lot of the gender roles like in my family, and I really resented that. And I would give crap to my mom about it too.
Yeah.
She would try to teach me to sift flour, and I'd be like, Mom, I have zero interest in doing this. Why don't you teach my brother to sift flour? And she would just like look at me like, are you kidding?
Like, oh my God, he's never going to sift flour.
I don't know if you remember this commercial, this guy singing and dancing with a mop. And she would look at that commercial and get so mad because it was a man with a cleaning product.
Oh my
She was
God.
like, oh, it shouldn't be that way. And I was like, I remember looking at her like, Mom, are you insane?
Like,
Men are allowed to clean.
Yeah, Dad's never picked up a mop ever. Like, have you seen the military? That's all they do is mop. The men have mops all day long. Like
one time, my brother, his bedroom was in the basement, and so he had his own bathroom down there.
Right.
And he decided one day, I guess, I don't know what came over him. He wanted to clean the bathroom floor. He decided the best way to do that is with furniture polish. So he took Pledge and he sprayed it all over the floor, wiped it up. So this was when my brother was like in his low 20s.
Okay.
Doug goes in there to use the bathroom and he like falls like it's an ice skating rink.
Right.
Yeah. And he was like so pissed. And I was so pissed. Everybody else in my family was like, oh, it's okay. He tried. He did his best. And I was like, Mom, if you had given him just 1 ounce of cleaning knowledge or like made him clean or be responsible for anything, he would have known not to use furniture polish on the floor. I was like so pissed.
Yeah, the fact that you're a dude in your 20s and you don't know how to clean a floor, that's pretty high level. Because like I didn't have that in my house. Like I knew how to clean shit.
That's the way it should be.
I don't feel like I had gender roles per se in that sort of thing, but that's pretty crazy.
That's good for you.
Yeah, I guess I had that going for me. But
to be fair to my brother, I think it's a lot better now. I don't think his wife would tolerate, that kind of behavior. So like he does.
She's probably like, hey, get the damn mop and clean and don't use the freaking Pledge, you jackass. Like, I think we kind of, made the case pretty strongly that authoritarianism is baked right into Christianity and really all religions overall. Like our religion and Christianity, it thrives in a top-down power structure where the leader has total authority. And, sometimes the direct line to God, or that's how they sell it. They're viewed as infallible and all-powerful and the voice of God to the people who follow him. This, it's not an outlier in Christianity. It's the norm. It's the standard. And it's certainly one of the big reasons, like when you're out of it, it feels so obviously freeing at first, but then also disconcerting if you're used to like having your whole life somewhat micromanaged.
Prescribed to you, yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, I can think for myself.
First, you have to learn how to think.
Yeah, that's a whole transition. So hopefully people benefit from this conversation. Hopefully it will help also identify the ways that we see authoritarianism creeping into the country and use our voice to speak out against it, because democracy and all the things that we care about in this country are potentially being undermined by religion.
Not potentially. They are.
Not potentially. They're actively being undermined. There's going to be a lot of links in the show notes so you guys can kind of follow up on this. Hopefully we can continue the conversation in our Facebook group, Dangerous Questions. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Flawed Theology Podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Susie. Tune in next time where we will continue to tackle the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
Follow us on Facebook at the Flawed Theology Podcast, and please join our Facebook group called Dangerous Questions. This group has really taken off a little bit because a lot of the stuff we've been talking about so far this season has come directly from you guys in the group. So we really appreciate the inputs and the feedback. So keep the stuff coming so we can have fun stuff to talk about. Listen to us on our website, which is flawedtheologypodcast.com, or any place that you get your favorite podcasts. And we will talk to you next time.
See you next time. And sociology considers authoritarianism. I have such a hard time saying that word.
I don't
know why.
Tongue twister.
Are you an authoritarianism? Are you an
authoritarian?
Thank you. You're not in that frame of mind where you're going to be subject to authoritarianisms. Man, I really cannot say that.
Well, yeah, and if you think another just gross expression of authoritarianism.
No, we can't say that word.
Yeah, where your sexuality is governed. Your sexuality is governed.
So Stephen Levitsky is a government persever.
That's a good one. I like that. Is that like a person who severs professionally? Great outtake.
Let me try this for a third time.
totally crapped out. But
hang on a sec.
She's taking her clothes off.
My head's stuck.
Her head's stuck. Just for the record, she's not really taking her clothes off.
Okay, I'm back. Did you see that? My head got stuck.
Yeah, I told people you were taking your clothes off, but then I had to recant it. So
recant.
I recanted.
I'll burn you.
I didn't want people to think we were running an X-rated show around here. So
no.